there will be blood.
How's it going, everybody? This is Dailies to Downloads. We are back with you, and my name is Chad. With me, as always, is Eric. Check us out on Apple Podcasts or Spotify if you'd rather listen to us than watch us. I wouldn't blame you, but hey, here we are. We add the visual component here on YouTube. So this week, we are going to conclude our trilogy of shows on the Saw franchise. We previously reviewed Spiral and then went over the best and worst traps. So this week we are just kind of going to go over the franchise as a whole and talk about our thoughts on each of the films and the series in general. So we will see where that takes us. And to start out, we'll group these movies into groups of three, and I'll explain why as we go along. So the first Saw was released on October 29th, 2004, directed by James Wan, and written by Lee Wannell. And Saw 2 was released October 28th, 2005, directed by Darren Lynn Bousman, and it was written by Lee Wannell and Darren Lynn Bousman. And then Saw 3, October 27th, 2006, also directed by Darren Lynn Bousman, and also that was written just by Lee Wannell, although the story was written by Lee Wannell and James Wan. So that trilogy of movies is kind of guided by Lee Wannell. So, and I think when he leaves, certainly you see a shift in the franchise in many ways. But Eric, how did you get into these movies? Did you watch the first movie from like the moment it kind of came out, or did you get into them later?
I do remember. I'm trying to think of the first time I was even like aware that they existed. It was definitely the first one because I do remember like being in the subway train station platform and seeing that poster of like a severed arm, severed leg.
Yeah, I think it was the leg. Yeah,
Yeah. Like so that I knew.
That was a pretty iconic poster for the time.
Yeah, and it was very
You
simple.
really see a lot of stuff like that then. Certainly images like that in the tone of black and white and sepia or whatever would come to be more common as years went along. But that image was pretty striking for the time.
Yeah, and I feel like there had been, and I was not really aware of this, but there had been a short film that I believe the two had made that was like a 6 or 7 minute thing, and that's Lee Wannell's character essentially with the bear trap thing on his head.
Right.
And that's the short that they made together first, which I saw because they put it on the DVD of the first one.
Right.
And obviously the first one I think the first film premiered at Sundance, but I was not really in the weeds at that point knowing about that. So I saw the first one not in theaters. It must have been on DVD right when it came out on home video. And back then, I remember for me at least, a big selling factor was Danny Glover.
Right.
Which how insignificant he became with the franchise. But at the time,
Yeah.
Danny Glover, I'm like, okay, it had been a few years, I feel like, since he had done anything of note.
Yeah, and oddly enough, that's the one character they really didn't milk too much as the franchise went along.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, given his lack of being involved in any way, shape, or form in the future, he couldn't even do flashbacks. Unless, hey, we're still going strong. Maybe Saw 12, we realize that he actually masterminded the whole thing.
Yeah, he'll be another apprentice.
Yeah, we can keep retconning the entire thing. Why not?
Yeah.
So that's how I originally saw it. It must have been the fall of 2004 or early 2005.
Right. Yeah, and I didn't see it in theaters either. I think I got into it through word of mouth, and at this point, I have no idea what friends would have recommended it to me. But,
It's just a general word of mouth. I'm hearing
people
out
on the street. The Central PA. Those people, they just talk about random movies in the street. But yeah, there were people that were mentioning that it was good, and I decided to check it out. And you mentioned Danny Glover being a selling point. I think one of the selling points for me, because it was mentioned, the guy from The Princess Bride is in this. So
yeah, of course.
So that's one of the main reasons I decided to check it out. And at the time, this was maybe just as I was becoming a film buff, hardcore film buff, when this came out. I think the idea at the time of it taking place mainly in one room I was just like, what the hell? Like, what's that?
I feel
At
like
the
there
time,
was
I
a
don't think I respected it as much. I would grow to love movies that would be set in like a limited setting.
yeah.
But at the time, I was like, oh, what's this? And but then obviously you see the twist at the end, and it kind of throws you for a loop. And the twist would go on to, I would say, almost be a crutch, if not a trap for the franchise as
Yeah.
time would go along. But yeah, the first film, I liked it, and that's kind of all I would say. Like at the time, like I liked the first one. I don't know if I was in love with it, but I liked it enough. I thought, okay, this was a cool little horror movie, and it was a neat twist that I didn't see coming.
Yeah, and like it was very cheaply made, and it felt that way. And it's funny that through was it 10 movies now, 10 or
It
uh,
will be.
10? Okay, that like even though the budgets may have been raised a little bit, they never really changed in terms of their look or aesthetic in terms of a budget. Um, but yeah, and I also just remember now I'm blanking on his name, but there was another guy who you think is the killer for most of the movie, and he was on Lost, and at the time, Lost
Right.
was a big show. It's on my list. I'll get to it in the next 20 years, but that I remember also there was talk about him uh, being in it as well. But like similar to you, like I was more looking at this list. Like I think that weekend I saw Ray or I saw Sideways. I think was not that I felt above anything. And this is also the same month as The Grudge, which was a PG-13 horror thing that did very very well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of thing. So this was Saw was like a different. The torture porn thing was not.
Yeah, that
Thing.
term hadn't been coined yet.
Yeah.
And like I was just going to say that this one was less about that aspect of it and more about the twist and more about the characters themselves. Obviously, being confined to one room, you're focusing on these certain guys. Um, but I would say that I became a fan of the franchise with number two. Number two, I thought was very good. Um, and I liked how obviously they would go on to be repetitive with it. They would use these multiple characters being locked in a certain area, and they would have to complete these tests. And I thought that the use of the various traps was well done in this one. I thought that this was the most balanced of the movies, and because you had the traps, you had the story, you had the characters, and you had the twist. So you had all of these different elements in working pretty well together. But what did you think of number two?
Um, yeah, this was what also stood out to me about this one is that it's really the first one really with Tobin Bell. Like, yes, he's dead on the floor in the first one, and you get the voice on the cassette tapes. But
That's
this is when you actually Tobin Bell's an actor, right?
right.
So that's a big shift. And once you get the sense of because the timeline is so crazy, I think Saw 2 doesn't take doesn't take place too far after Saw 1, I
Right.
think, but I'm not sure. It's hard keeping up with when each one takes place.
Yeah.
But I remember it being more like a group kind of thing that now we have commodified with the PG-13 escape room movies. That's essentially what Saw 2 feels like. It's an escape room
That's true.
house
Yeah.
movie mixed in with a Tobin Bell playing a Hannibal Lecter type outsmart the detective story.
Don't they wish they could go back and make that a subtitle?
Yeah, well, hey, I mean, look, well, we got another 30 of these movies to go, but
Well,
you're right.
they've done an escape room horror movie now, so
Yeah, and there's a new one coming out like next month.
of course.
And I saw a trailer and I'm like, oh, this feels like Saw for teenagers,
Yeah.
essentially, which is like, I'm sure that's exactly how it was pitched. So yeah, and I think also with the second one, that formula was really established,
Yes.
and you were either. I remember at the time because I was just like, I'm going to support horror stuff. It was cool that they were coming out at the same weekend every year.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, this became a staple of Halloween because they were able to, I mean, literally make the first 7 of these movies came out 1 year after the other.
yeah, I
And
think like after opening weekend, the next one
yeah,
would be greenlit, and they'd go right into production on the next.
until Jigsaw. Jigsaw, there was a 7 year gap between Saw 3D and Jigsaw. But yeah, they came because they were easy to make. They were cheap to make, and as we've talked about in previous episodes, they didn't always use A-listers. Like you weren't seeing Robert De Niro or Al Pacino as the detective. You were seeing Donnie Wahlberg,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
or people like that. People who might not demand like a 7-figure paycheck
Yeah.
to take
Like
part in this.
we said the last time that the actress from Seventh Heaven is in
Right.
the second one.
And it's not like she was doing anything else really at the time.
So,
But yeah, you got a lot with Tobin Bell, as you mentioned. Shawnee Smith became, took the forefront as a character here as Amanda. And yeah, I mean, I liked number 2. And so the end of this grouping was the Saw 3. And I would say this is where the plot manipulation really kind of starts to snowball a little bit. This is where it gets going. The traps are more creative. The plot hook is interesting and the twist works, but the acting here is more subpar, I would say. And I would say that everything going on is like kind of secondary to the torture porn aspects of it. Like it, yeah, I'd say the traps and the horror and the blood and the gore becomes more of a focus here, um, which at that time was unusual for the
yeah.
franchise. But I still think Saw 3 works in spots. There's a lot I like about it, but I would, knowing what we see in 4, 5, 6, and 7 and onward, that Saw 3 is really where the formula really starts to get going and creates problems afterwards. Wouldn't you say so, or would you have a different look at it?
I would agree with that. The thing I like about Saw 3, what I thought at the time, foolish me, was that there was a sense of finality there.
Yeah.
You know, and
In
and
that
I
funny, looking back, you would think, oh yeah, well, it's done now.
it's like, well, and like that was something I would give the creators, that it wasn't like Freddy or Jason where like they die in everyone, but they always come back.
Right.
With this, it was like, no, they chopped his head off. I think that means he's dead, So
Right.
so it did feel like a finality thing, which you don't get in horror movies. And how stupid was I to find out next year that we're gonna keep doing this? But they never did go back on that.
That's true. They didn't.
Yeah.
They didn't resurrect him.
No,
really in the
they hinted at it a lot for a bunch of them.
fantasy sense, but yeah.
Yeah. But then how did they wind up doing it? Like, you're seeing things that are actually a prequel, but you don't know that, and that's how they do
Right.
it. They get very stupid. But yeah, I think that's when the third one, felt very much again like, I think around this time too, they were taking almost like scripts or stories that were not Saw specific and turning them into Saw movies.
Yeah.
So you would get this like we said, the last one's like a fun house thing. This
Right.
one is like one guy going through obstacles to save other people who have wronged him,
Right.
And then they kind of like shoehorn these into the Saw formula.
And it makes you wonder, like we were talking about with the traps, like how did they think of the traps? Did they work from the characters backwards, or did they think of the trap first and then figure out a way? Like, and you wonder, like, what they did with the plots. Did they just think, okay, these people can be evil people who hurt the elderly in a nursing home, and we're gonna put them all in a room together, or stuff like that, and or do they tackle it from a different way? You don't really know, because there's not a lot to these when you really break it down. It just becomes a lot of twists, a lot of messing with time, and it's weird because these movies, like, they manipulate the audience blatantly, and the audience almost asks for it. It's almost like part of embracing these movies is admitting, okay, well, they're going to screw with me, and that's just part of it.
Yeah, and I mean, I get that as like an audience. Um, you've what's the word? Prepared the audience. You've made them familiar to expect that, right?
Right.
Like, and same thing when you would see like a slasher movie in the '90s. You always knew it was one of the high school students, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so now, yeah. So by the time you expect that up until this latest one, that in the last 2 minutes, as soon as the main music theme comes on, that's when we get the reveal.
Right.
That's when we see all the flashbacks to specific words, blah blah blah. But yeah,
And it's funny, like, we both wrote for 411. If I went back and looked at, some of the articles I was writing, I wonder if I had talked about the end of Saw 3 and was like, well, how are they going to go on from here?
yeah,
I guess the next one has to be a prequel.
And I even think like right after the opening weekend of Saw 3, they announced Saw 4, and it's like,
Right.
like, can't we just like have a week to like digest this? Like, I don't know. Like, and this by this point, like you were reading off the names of, because Darren Lynn Bousman was like 26, 27. Like he wanted to do his passion project, Repo, the Genetic Opera, which, well,
Right.
what a passion project. But like that was so he was like in this farm system, that like kept them for each one at every year. James Wan went on to like start up the well, that puppet movie didn't do well. Dead Silence.
Oh, yeah.
That one bombed.
No, that was not good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that one.
But Insidious and Conjuring, those were his other franchises that he wanted to essentially become like a showrunner on, because they are kind of like TV episodic.
Yeah, and like I guess that's a goal if you're a horror aficionado or a horror filmmaker. You want to create these things that become, entities in and of themselves to a degree. But in a lot of ways, I would say that's one of the traps that the genre falls into, that they don't need to every time. But that's
Yeah.
that's a bigger topic.
Yeah. Well, Lee Whannell has gone on to do much bigger and better things, independently of everyone else.
I would say it was between Saw 4 and 5 where I was really starting to say, okay, how many more of these are they going to do? Like,
yeah.
Which is funny considering how long they went on. But I would say at this time I was like, okay, really? Like,
it was definitely like a 2 or 3 movie day, and it's like, okay, I guess I'll put in this one as well.
Yeah.
And like we didn't mention that also around this time, which I really hated, was the Paranormal Activity surge. So in comparison, looking back, I was happier to embrace the Saw movies.
Oh, absolutely.
I realize it's choosing between two lows, but the Paranormal Activity things became such a gigantic behemoth that I really didn't like. So I chose the lesser of two evils, I guess, at the time.
Right. Well, our next group, Saw 4 was released October 26, 2007, directed by Darren Lynn Bousman, written by Patrick Melton and Marcus Dunstan. And Saw 5 was released October 24th, 2008, directed by David Hackle and written by Patrick Melton and Marcus Dunstan. And Saw 6 was released on October 23rd, 2009, directed by Kevin Grudert and also written by Patrick Melton.
You gotta look up these directors. What have they? How have their careers been?
Right, and that's the thing you were saying, the farm system.
Yeah,
they would have crew members gradually move up the ladder and get bigger and better roles, and they wanted to keep things in house. And I get that to a certain extent. You want to have the same tone and theme and look and all that, and that's good, in a way. But I would say that this trilogy of movies, now I don't know if you remember this, Eric, but a friend of ours, George Soroy, who has his own podcast, we also would talk about these movies when the 411 Movie Zone podcast was around. And he called this, I forget what he called the first three movies, maybe the origin of Jigsaw, but he called these three movies the legacy of Jigsaw, which I always thought was pretty apropos for these three movies specifically. Because at the time it was only Saw 1 through 6. So
yeah.
But that's the way he referred to these particular movies. And because we see Costas Mandalore's Detective Hoffman take center stage as the main villain, and but this is where specifically with Saw 4, like this is where they're really starting to try and connect every single dot they can from the past movies and the current one. Meaningless points of the plots become suddenly crucial parts of the story, and they're more about the traps and the twists for twists' sake, I would argue, than the characters or the story. And I think they really start to fall victim to that repetition here. They screw. We already talked about how they screw around with time, and when in the case of Saw 4, it's regarding John's autopsy. But yeah. So what did you? I'll ask this: how do you think the franchise progressed at this point? Did you like how it was going? Now, you talked about it compared to Paranormal Activity, but that's a low bar. So, did you like how the franchise was moving along, or did you think, okay, they're really starting to reach now?
I mean, I definitely thought they were starting to reach. I think it's Saw 4 where they're like, we're gonna make Jigsaw's wife a big part of this story, and
Yeah.
it's like, really, Jigsaw's wife? Like, did you guys just throw something at a dartboard and land on Jigsaw's wife? Like where? And she had a kid. Where's the kid? Oh no, but the kid didn't survive. Okay, what's that? Here's a flashback of it.
Right.
It like it obviously felt like you were just shooting in the dark here. But it was sort of like a, strangely and sickly as it sounds, a comfort food every year on the same weekend. And then as soon as the weekend was over, nobody was talking about it anymore. But
Right.
it was just like the 90 minutes to catch up and see what ridiculousness they build
It was
to.
like the Netflix reaction before Netflix reactions were a thing, right?
Yeah. And they would be huge for 3 days, and that was it. And yeah, by the time, in terms of the Jigsaw legacy, I feel like it's almost like a Bechdel test kind of thing, where it's like, try to find any moments in these movies where characters aren't referring to Jigsaw.
Right.
4, 5, or 6. He's dead. He doesn't come back, but that's all they talk about for all these movies.
Right.
And so it becomes ridiculous. But by that point, you're watching it somewhat for the humor.
Yeah. No, I agree. And because the traps themselves become humorous in a dark, twisted way,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you
yeah.
have to be into the dark, twisted humor to really appreciate that part of it. And other people might just look at it and say, "Oh, that's gross" or whatever.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that's when they start to leaning into a little bit of that darker
yeah.
humor. I think. Yeah,
Yeah, no, I agree. Saw 5, I thought everything I said about Saw 4, I would say Saw 5 is just increased. Like, they don't really, at that point, they stop caring about the characters, and it is really mostly about the traps at that point. And what's the twist going to be? And they almost fall victim to like a M. Night Shyamalan curse in
you
that
go
way.
in. Yeah, yeah, and also at that point, like we discussed in the traps episode, where there aren't enough creative ways to kill someone after so many of these movies. Like
Right.
they're gonna get dumber and dumber, and again, I guess that's why you still come for it. But and also, like as we saw with the last one, it just felt dull now, right? They're not creative anymore. You can't do any other way to
Right.
twist a finger or to rip out a tongue. You can't. There's only one way to do it. I think. So yeah, by that point, it became very rote, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, with this last one, they really had to. They're like they clearly wanted to dial back from the torture porn, but at the same time, they knew that they had to think of more creative traps than had been delivered previous.
Yeah,
Which, had I been in the room, I would have said, you don't have to do that. You
yeah,
just have to make the traps you think of mean more.
yeah.
Like that. But hey, I'm not a Hollywood writer, so
And they well, I'm not sure they are either, really. But and also like they try to have their cake and eat it too by saying like, oh, some of these traps are not meant to be beaten, you know, because
yeah, we talked about that with the traps and like how the goal of the franchise and the whole intentions of Jigsaw himself changed to the point of like, okay, we just want to watch people die. Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah. and this was big too because this is also the time of the Hostel movies, which is really that's all it is. Uh, like the
Yeah.
bare minimum of plot in those movies. Uh,
Yeah, I mean,
American
well, yeah,
Corpse,
that's
and
I've
that's it.
I used to have pretty heated debates with some of our former colleagues at 411 about the Hostel movies. I'm not a fan, but like because I liked the minimal or manipulative as it might be, I liked the story aspects of the Saw franchise. I liked the fact that they were trying to surprise me. And I'd forgotten what I was going to say earlier, but now I remember. What's funny about the story manipulation is that you don't know if they're really just screwing with your head or if the whole time you should have taken it literally and you would have known what was going on. you know,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
which is funny in that way. But with the Hostel movies and like a movie like Captivity, which came to mind as I was researching this, like these movies,
Turistas, remember like there was a bunch of these.
right? Like it was a
Yeah,
whole subgenre, and I guess what we came back for with the Saw franchise was not just the fact that you mentioned it as comfort food, horror comfort food in a way that you go to it with the traps and twists, and you know what to expect to a certain degree, and you like that. Like they change enough that you keep going back to it, I guess.
yeah.
Um,
And it's worth saying too that this was also a period where we didn't really have any of the typical slasher franchise icons with movies out around this time period.
yeah,
Rob
the,
Zombie's
yeah,
Halloween came
yeah,
out.
'cause this
Right?
subgenre really kind of put that whole subgenre to bed, I would say,
Yeah,
at least for a little bit. And because no, like those were campy and old hat, I would think, to people in Hollywood anyway.
yeah. And by the time you get to the Rob Zombie's Halloween,
Yeah.
there are certain things that feel influenced by torture porn in that movie.
Oh, absolutely. They were a
Yeah,
lot grittier,
yeah,
and yeah, absolutely, a lot more aggressive in that way.
yeah,
Um, no, yeah, I would agree. With Saw 6, I thought that they were really trying too hard to milk what they could out of the Jigsaw character. At that point, like what envelopes did he leave to all these different people? Nothing really of note happened in that one. I would imagine most viewers, maybe not, or not a huge fan of Costas Mandalore's Hoffman character. And by this point, the characters that they are testing become progressively more annoying and less. We, the audience, are less sympathetic. It's like we don't care if they die or how
yeah,
they die,
yeah.
like at all. It's,
Yeah, by that point, it is the typical slasher movie. Again, I don't these actors. You don't really hear a lot about most 99% of the actors in the Saw movies.
yeah. At no point do you hear the person's he starred in Saw 5 and then he was
Yeah,
an
yeah.
Oscar winner.
This series does not have its Jamie Lee Curtis or its Kevin Bacon or
Right, which says a lot about, in my opinion anyway, about how this franchise progressed, because it became less like the actors were really very disposable. Like I would imagine that if you're an actor who signs on for Saw 4, you're not going to be going in there and being like, "Hey, my character wouldn't do this."
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, you're not doing the Stanislavski method for Saw.
Like Darius McCrary didn't come on there and is
Yes,
like,
yeah,
"Hey, in Family Matters, we did it this way."
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, and I also wonder about actors sometimes in that scenario where I know a job is a job. It almost feels though to me like a career killer a lot of times.
Right.
I don't
Because
know.
it really doesn't showcase your abilities very well. I mean, you
Yeah,
have to really show your talent and get above the trap that you're in, which is
yeah,
really what the audience is paying attention to. So,
yeah. And people, I think, look. This is also. I'm sorry, I'm thinking so much about the history now of like the period of Lionsgate becoming big due to these movies, and then like it wins an Oscar for Crash.
right,
And then like they want to become more like prestigious in a way,
right,
but the Saw thing are still making the most money. So like
right,
it's
yeah.
weird, like juggling of the two.
So the next three, We have Saw 3D, which was released October 29th, 2010, directed by Kevin Grudert, again written by Patrick Melton and Marcus Dunstan. I'm going to look up those guys, what they've done since then. We have then 7 years later, we have Jigsaw, which was released October 27th, 2017, directed by the Spierig brothers and written by Josh Stolberg and Peter Goldfinger, which I think I said the previous Bond villain.
Yeah.
And then most recently, we did a whole review of Spiral, which was released May 14th, 2021, and Darren Lynn Bousman made his return, but it was also written by Josh Stolberg and Peter Goldfinger. So I would say Saw 3D probably fits in more with the legacy of Jigsaw series, simply because, Detective Hoffman is still a thing there.
And at the time, wasn't it called The Final Chapter?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was. I mean, at that point, the way I looked at that one is like, they must have been in the room and they were like, all right, we've done everything we can, so we need to bring back Cary Elwes.
And he's like, guys, I've been asking you for 6 movies. When are you going to bring me back?
Right. And I wonder, it would be hilarious if they were like, Danny Glover is not returning our calls. So so we need to bring back Cary Elwes. The character being tested is a person who lied about being a victim of Jigsaw and wrote a book, a self-help book, it's a very weak subplot, because what's happening in Saw 3D is more about Jigsaw's wife at that point. And so you have Detective Hoffman, spoiler alert, ends up killing Jigsaw's wife in the reverse bear trap, which is probably the most famous trap throughout the franchise, I would say, simply because it comes up all the time. But what I didn't like was that the way she died from that trap, she actually had a nightmare of her own death in that movie, which I thought that trap was more interesting than the way she actually died.
Is that involved a train?
Yeah, he like hooked up this train with a big spear on it.
Yeah.
It cut her in half, which is like such a bizarre way to kill somebody.
Yeah, and that was such a 3D moment.
Yeah, like, it was. You're right.
The train and the spear, and that's like the dimension coming right at you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's Lumiere Brothers 101, 1895.
Yeah, so that's kind of where, obviously, that's where Detective Hoffman exits the franchise. And
we thought that was the end.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, I know I keep becoming a fool, but always assuming that this is the end. But
it's like a a Kiss final
reunion,
goodbye tour, or like a Mick Foley comeback, whatever you want to say. Like, it's just when you think it's over, it really isn't over at all.
Yeah.
Jigsaw, you would have at that point, Jigsaw, you have too many apprentices. So let's talk about that. I don't know if you know how many apprentices there are, Eric, but there's actually 5 if you count his wife, who does stuff for him in the movies. Like, it's actually 5 apprentices, which, like, if you look back on it, it's like, this guy, how he was able to spend all his time teaching these apprentices and yet hiding his involvement with those apprentices from all the other ones.
Yes, and not even
want to explode.
And like, you would think he has like a giant roadmap. Okay, I'm going to be teaching this one, but this one will be testing this one. But if I don't call them at this phone number to let them know, like, all these things.
Yeah, I wonder if, like, if he called, he was talking to Dr. Gordon, who was Cary Elwes' character, and accidentally called him Detective Hoffman.
Yeah, it's like, who's that? Oh, don't worry about that. Sorry. Who am I here? Where am I? Yeah.
He has cancer, for goodness sakes. He's bound to make a slip up or two, right?
Well, that's also the funny thing, right? Because like, he's anti-charisma. Like, he's not like this. To choose a leader, you need like Pacino as Jigsaw or something. I mean, Tobin Bell is a pretty chill, relaxed dude.
And they would never have killed him off if it was Al Pacino.
I mean, at least I'd be like, okay, I could see charismatic leader here for a cult.
I wish I could do a Pacino impression right now with him like yelling at Amanda in the other room.
He's like, oh, that
would have been great. We need to fantasy cast this franchise. But the writers were really trying hard in Jigsaw to kind of unearth any part of the story that they could think of to use. I did like Eleanor, the freaky obsessed Jigsaw fan who collected all the traps.
Yeah.
I thought she was a good character, but that's about the most of my praise. That was the one with the silo feed thing where the knives and the things were dropping.
Yeah, and that I also it felt like it was going to be a return to the original, that it was going to be primarily in that barn
Yeah,
thing. Yeah, but by that point, it almost felt like they were being very secretive about, is it a remake? Is it a sequel? What
they
is it?
wanted you to think that Tobin Bell would return and
Yeah,
be alive, but to their credit, they kept him dead. Um,
I mean, they kind of set them up as a lose-lose, right? It's like either they bring him back and people hate that because it's unrealistic, or you find out you're just watching a flashback the whole time and you feel cheated that way. So I feel like you kind of they set the audience up for disappointment either way.
right.
Um,
Yeah.
uh,
And obviously, we talked about Spiral already. I admire. I think it's an improvement in some ways, and but overall, we talked about how we don't think it's a very good film in general. But they kept with the whole copycat aspect of it. People influenced by Jigsaw maybe is a better way to put
yeah,
it.
I'll give them credit, I guess, at least for um, somewhat trying to break free. I mean, it doesn't. It's still very much the formula of all the
Yeah.
other ones. But like Jigsaw is like mentioned in name only. There are no more audio tapes. You know, by this time it's 2021. If we're still doing audio cassette tapes, like what the hell? Like this guy, like where you have to go like find a Walkman or a Talk Boy to like play this at a certain point. Like
Talk Boy, that would be amazing.
you gotta get a Talk Boy. Hey, yeah, like we said last time, Kevin McAllister was the original Jigsaw.
That
You
would
know?
be great. See, that's the thing. So we have before we talk about the franchise more, like if we have Saw 10 coming around the corner here, like in my mind, they could go two different directions. They either need to hire the best people they can to make Saw 10 a really great film, or they could go the Jason X route and just make it the silliest, most ridiculous movie ever. So, like, but to just make another, detective movie with a copycat or a person that was an apprentice, or Jigsaw's son is actually alive.
Yeah.
If it becomes something like that, then to me they're leaving a lot of creativity and a lot of fun on
Yeah,
the cutting room floor.
I think that's definitely with the last one at least. Like the fun is gone.
Yes, yeah, and we
It
didn't
was
talk about that really when we talked about the movie, but I
no,
agree with you.
it's extremely dire for numerous reasons, and it's like, well, who is this really rewarding for, right? Like,
Right.
just get yeah, like you said, kind of get stupider, get that. Or like, guy, like I don't think that first option of bringing on the best talent is realistic. I don't think that's gonna happen.
It's
So I
probably
mean,
not Al Pacino, but
yeah, I mean, he's done some rough 88 minutes. That movie was a Saw like kind of thing. But yeah, I just feel like go all the way with it. Obviously, on a much larger scale, that's what the Fast and the Furious movies, as they keep going on, they keep saying like, oh, this relative that we said was dead is alive and
Yeah.
he's back and blah blah blah. So like, they're all pulling from the same toy chest of like.
It's funny. I don't know if they've mentioned in any of these movies the relatives Jigsaw had, but that's an avenue they haven't explored.
I mean, how could he have any relatives? He'd be so busy with all these apprentices. He probably had no time to see mom and dad at Thanksgiving.
They could have Tobin Bell, look differently, or it just, this is his brother Rod,
Yeah, you think he was probably great in shop class?
Rod Kramer,
He worked in a hardware store. His dad owned a hardware store, and that's where he got his love for sharp objects. Like, there could be a whole origin.
They could do that. And I'm just thinking off the top of my head. So recently, with Jeremy Thomas, another colleague of ours from 411, posted something about Jason X like side novels. Like there's been other novels written about, I guess, that part of the franchise, the Jason X part of the franchise. Do you know, has there been any side novels of Saw? I don't think that there has. There might be, but I haven't heard of any.
I'm not sure. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, or if
But
there
yeah,
were any
so
kind of like
I'm gonna look that up, and if I find any, I'll post the pictures here. But
yeah,
that
or
would be
comic
interesting to see
books
because
or something.
what's that?
Yeah, comic books or something.
Right.
Like I could definitely see fans making their own thing.
Yeah, fan
And
fiction. I'm sure yeah, like I'm sure various people have done things online, but I wonder if anything's actually been published. But yeah, we'll have to see if that stuff exists. So overall, Eric, how do you compare this franchise to other horror franchises? While you're thinking about your answer, I'll say that I didn't grow up with the Halloween franchise. I didn't grow up with the Friday the 13th or the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. I saw those movies, but I didn't grow up as much of a horror fan as I was a fan of, action movies or sports movies or whatever. So I like this franchise a lot, even though I admit there's like a ton of flaws as we've discussed throughout this show. I like this franchise simply because it offers, even though it's the same, different things pretty much each time out with regard to the traps and the twists, and it keeps you guessing to a certain extent. Whereas, as we've talked about loosely, some of these other horror franchises would resurrect their characters in silly ways and would really resort to insane plots to keep the franchise going. Whereas this one really kind of stuck with a routine, good or bad. But anyway, other than I really like the Scream franchise, but I do like the Saw franchise. In if we're gauging it compared to franchises that have gone on for a long time. So what do you think?
yeah, I think the thing I liked most about it is what those other franchises that you mentioned that are the legacy franchises or what have you didn't do, which was that it acknowledged that it was part of a larger story,
Right.
which was like a no-no for all the other slasher movies at the time. They never even acknowledged the previous one or anything like that. Whereas with Saw, it really did feel like it rewarded you, at least in theory, like rewarded you for seeing them all.
Right. True. Yeah.
And that was rare at the time. And this was right before now, unfortunately, we're in the era of extended universes for every little thing.
Yeah.
And so now you have to see 20 other movies before you can watch Iron Man 4, so you know what the hell's going on. But like at the time, that was pretty rare. And to get them year after year, we were only getting that for Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, really.
Yeah.
So and this is as far away from those as you can get, but like it was
Yeah.
still on a year to year with a consistent storyline that carried over from movie to movie.
That's what I'm calling it. Daniel Radcliffe is in Saw 10.
I mean,
You never
look,
know.
maybe didn't he take an apprenticeship at one point to like get some credits or an internship at
Probably. Yeah. It might have been with
Jigsaw
it
Castle?
might have been with John Kramer.
Yeah, he spent a summer in where's I'm sorry, where does Saw even take place? Where's it supposed to be?
That's a good question. I don't remember the city off the top of
Where-
my head. You
oh,
know what? I actually have no idea. Maybe it's New York City.
uh,
We'll post it. We research.
it's very
We
hard to
research a lot of
like. I feel like there's yeah,
it.
the geography is like very vague. I
It
feel like
is. Made probably intentionally so.
yeah, it's probably so, but
It'd be great if
like,
maybe they never mentioned the city, and it'd be great if in Saw 10 they revealed it as Gotham or something.
the whole time, like there's like it opens with a trap in the Statue of Liberty. It's like, oh, okay, I got it. So that's where. Wow. Okay.
But it was kind of genius of them to make it a Halloween tradition in a way. I mean, it's an easy thing to do from a
Yeah.
marketing standpoint, but I mean, when are people going to be in the mood for a horror movie around Halloween? So,
Yeah.
why not release it every Halloween? Because that's the time when the guy can convince his girlfriend or whoever to, hey, let's go see this. Oh, it's just for Halloween.
Yeah. Yeah. And like that again seems like such a novel concept, but this is also the era of us getting actual Halloween franchise movies in August.
Yeah.
I still have no idea who came up with. I mean, it was the Weinstein, so we knew what the hell they were on. But it was bizarre. You make a movie called Halloween and you open it in August. it was a weird time to be alive. Bush was president. It was a strange time.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we'll have to see. So yeah, Spiral was the first movie that Tobin Bell was not in any way. So we'll have to see if they bring him back. I would imagine they'd have to bring him back at least for a flashback.
And they didn't have the puppet guy either, right? The clown on the bike. Was it?
I guess not. Just the Spiral thing. But
yeah,
yeah, that's it. Yeah, you're right.
What he's up to? I hope that little puppet guy is doing okay.
Yeah, Tobin Bell said he would return if it explored the puppet, as we talked about before. So
yeah,
we'll have to see.
Like Spanky or something, or
Billy. I think it's Billy.
Billy. It should be Spanky. Come on.
It should be Spanky. That's a better name. I agree. Well, hey, let us know what you think of the Saw franchise. If you like these movies more than us, less than us, if you hate them, let us know what you think. If you're looking forward to Saw 10, if you hope that it takes place in space, maybe John Cena will be the brother there as well.
And also choose your favorite trap for us to perform on each other next week.
Yeah. That'll be a bonus video.
See if you can get out of it in time. We'll do it. We'll do our best.
It'll make a news story. Nobody watched this YouTube show, but it became a sensation once they killed each other. All right. Well, on that note, my name is Chad. This is Eric, and we will see you next week.
Game over.